Hello and welcome. Today on the 56th lecture, that means the last week of this course, the 12th week, let us discuss about India's climate action. And through this, we will have focus on how India is moving towards adaptation oriented from a mitigation oriented approach towards accommodating to the climate change. So first is the concepts we are going to cover. First is in terms of India's shift with respect to adaptation versus mitigation. So as I mentioned, we are moving towards adaptation, and this is also in concurrence or in line up with the COP29 that discusses most of the financial gaps. So global climate governance challenges we will try to touch upon, and we will also discuss about the economic growth versus the climate commitments and India's energy transition strategy. And we will also discuss about clean energy and domestic manufacturing, climate adaptation initiatives in India, and also India's updated climate action plan 2035, which was just released in the last week of March 2026. So that is also regarded as the third INDC. That means our national determined contribution, which is intended. So intended national determined contribution, as far as the third one is concerned, till which is targeted for 2035. So why is India prioritizing adaptation over mitigation? So why we are moving towards adaptation over mitigation, or giving preference to adaptation over mitigation? So there have been a shift in focus from global mitigation targets towards local resilience need. It is a very important, because as it is very important as we move in terms of, as we see, local level execution, local level action is extremely important. So we have started moving, or the focus, global focus, have started moving from mitigation targets towards the local need in terms of what is the resilience need at local scale, local level. Emphasis also on development first and climate resilient growth. So there has to be emphasis is given to the development. So first you develop and then you move towards climate resilient growth. So climate resilient growth come development has to be taken place. Adaptation seen as immediate, practical and locally beneficial. So if we adapt at local scale, that means it is actually becoming very practical, very practical and immediate, and action is immediate. So something is there, in terms of climate change, we adapt. So that means what? That means it is a kind of immediate action, and it is very, very practically oriented. So India has signaled a shift in its climate stance by prioritizing adaptation over emission cuts. So that means because India is prioritizing adaptation, so there is lot of emission cuts is also done. Means the adaptation priority is over the emission cost, or in comparison to the emission cost. This reflects concerns over global inaction and weak financial commitments at COP29. So this shift, as far as India's policy is concerned, from mitigation to adaptation, this itself also reflects the concerns over global inaction and weak financial commitment. We have also discussed in some of our previous classes that there is some $1 trillion of requirement USD, but the current flow is very less. So it falls short of the mitigation need. So that itself highlights one of the weak financial commitments of at COP29. So this has further underscored by it's likely delay in submitting the 2035. Just you see, India has submitted the third INDC just a week ago or in the last week of March. India aims for low carbon growth at its own pace with energy transition driven by domestic priorities. So the point is very clear. We want to have a growth in terms of low carbon growth, but the transition needs to be driven by domestic priorities or at a local priorities. So why India is shifting from mitigation to adaptation? So re-evaluation of global climate commitments. Global targets of track 42% emission reduction by 2030, 57% by 2035, but not being met. So when the global climate commitments have been re-evaluated, we found there is little off track as far as the global targets are concerned. So 42% emission reduction by 2030 and 57% by 2035. So this is what, as far as India is shifting, India's commitment is shifting because from mitigation to adaptation. Climate finance gap. Demand is about 1 trillion per year and climate 29 outcome is 300 billion per year from 2035. So this is what is the gap. So that also triggered the countries such as India to move from mitigation oriented approach towards adaptation, which is more practical, effective at local scale. Coming to weak global momentum. US withdrawal from Paris Agreement. The major polluters, the major emitters, if the country like US withdraws from Paris Agreement, that means it is escaping or it is not committal for the emission it has met. So this has led to weak global momentum. So in conclusion, global cooperation is uncertain, so countries must prioritize self-reliance strategy. So this indicates that if big players are away after doing a lot of emissions, and so that means we have to work at local level, we have to work at country level, so that country level prioritization in terms of self-reliance strategies comes up. Immediate and local benefits. India argues that global climate targets overlook developing nations' immediate needs. So as far as the argument goes, India immediate and local benefits, we know that India argues that global climate targets overlook developing nations' immediate needs. Adaptation provides direct and immediate benefits, local level impact, infrastructure, agriculture and water systems. For example, the CRA, climate resilient infrastructure, CRI, disaster preparedness and early warningness. Unlike mitigation, adaptation does not depend on the global coordination. This is what is provided by adaptation, means various adaptation means. So now moving on to how India is balancing the growth and clean energy transition. As far as the domestic clean energy is concerned, India aims to reduce its dependence on foreign supply chains for clean energy technologies such as solar panels, electric batteries, through a new national manufacturing mission announced in Union Budget 2025. So policies are being designed to support indigenous production of solar cells, wind turbines and battery storage solutions. Look at the figure on the right hand side, lower left hand side, India power capacity 2021 actual and 2023 forecast. So the green color shows about solar. So lot of forecasts by 2030 or end of this decade, 34% share is going to be from solar energy out of 817 gigawatts what is targeted for. And the next is the coal, and 17% is coming from the hydro and 3% is coming from the gas sector, and also from wind sector giving 17% and 9% is coming from hydro sector. That's the target. So there are policies that are being designed to support indigenous production of solar cells, wind turbines and battery storage solutions. Now move on to various flexibility mechanisms. India is seeking greater autonomy in determining its energy transition pace rather than adhering to externally imposed targets. So we have to, India as a nation, it is determined to maintain its own transition pace. It is not there to come under any external pressure or any imposed target. So while decarbonization remains a long-term goal, India is unwilling to compromise economic growth through immediate restrictions on fossil fuel use. So there have been pressure, but India has to look at its own domestic scenario. So that is why it is unwilling to compromise economic growth through immediate restriction on fossil fuel. But there has to be a transition. So a transition period and smooth transition has been advocated as far as Indian nation is concerned. A bottom-up approach through ground level initiatives is seen as more effective than top-down mandate. So bottom-up approach, that means you start from the bottom, start at the local level, because at the local level the resilience, the action, the immediate action is more practical. So bottom-up approach has been is now visualized as a better approach than a kind of top-down. So this is how India is balancing its growth and clean energy transition. Moving on, low carbon development. Despite resisting strict coal phase down commitments, India is expanding its renewable energy sector. So at the one end, India is committed for low carbon development. So that means there has been strict resistance to coal phase down. There is strict restriction in terms of coal phase down, and on the other side there is too much momentum as far as the energy coming from the renewable sector. India is on track to meet its 2030 NDC, National Determined Contribution Targets. All of us know 50% installed electricity capacity from non-fossil fuels by end of this decade, and which is almost reached 46.8% by end of last year, that means November 24. So India aims to create an additional 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide sink. This is a very important target because this is coming from the forest sector, from the green sector, from the vegetation sector. So if we create an additional 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide sink through forest or forest expansion by end of this decade, in comparison to 2005 level. So that's the target. So additional 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide sequestration. The fourth point is, as far as the Forest Survey of India is concerned, who is the nodal body under Ministry of Forest and Environment and Climate Change, it estimates a carbon sink of 30 to 43 billion tons in 2023, which is higher from 28.14 billion in 2005, which is an additional 2.29 billion tons. So this national estimate coming from Forest of India implies that our forests are holding more carbon. So more carbon. So that means they are behaving with time. In comparison to 2005, in 2023, the forests have the carbon sink capacity of the forest have increased. Moving to the projection, the projection indicate that 31.71 billion tons by 2030. This should surpass the NDC target. So what is our target? India is going to surpass its target. So India targets a 45% reduction in GDP emission intensity by end of this decade. Now move on to solar and wind energy investments. So solar and wind energy investments remain a priority with ambitious targets for hydrogen energy development. So the installed renewable electricity generation capacity is as follows. Solar is 20.6%, wind is 10.5%, hydro is 10.3%, and nuclear is 1.8%. So developing this SMR is important. So recognizing its slow progress in nuclear energy, India is now pushing for indigenous small modular nuclear reactors to enhance energy security. So the other important point is to come out with a small modular nuclear reactor SMR, because nuclear energy also some energy consumption should be met from the nuclear sources. So that is why indigenous small modular nuclear reactors development is important, and that will cater to the energy need in terms of the renewable resources, and particularly as far as the industrial requirement is concerned, this nuclear energy can be a good support. What are India's key climate adaptation initiatives? As we know, in terms of NAP, our National Adaptation Plan, it was developed by MOEF that aligns to sustainable development and focuses on climate resilience across sectors, including agriculture, water management, and urban planning. Adaptation in agriculture, particularly heat and water stress, threaten food security. Adaptation measures include climate resilient seeds and improved soil health practices, groundwater conservation, and modified cropping techniques. Urban climate resilience, the NMHS, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, promotes waste and waste management and green building or green infrastructure. So we have schemes such as AMRUT. So AMRUT stands for Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. So this aims to tackle urban flooding. We also, as have been discussed quite often, the Mission Life. Life stands for Lifestyle for Environment. This is an India-led global initiative, and it promotes sustainable living and individual responsibility in climate action. So it helps in terms of shifting from a use and dispose mindset to a circular economy. So instead of use and dispose, the circular economy mindset talks about reuse, recycle, and all those things. So that is the main motto of Mission Life, which is an Indian-led global initiative. So India's adaptation related plans and frameworks. India has launched various programs and schemes to finance and implement adaptation action. Adaptation action, along with other climate and developmental actions, can be executed and financed through three types of schemes. One is through central scheme, we call CS abbreviated. It's fully funded by the central government. The central sponsored schemes, abbreviated as CSS schemes. So this is jointly funded and executed both by central and state. So CSS, it's called centrally sponsored schemes. And then the third one is typically or purely the state schemes. These state schemes, they are designed, implemented, and funded by the state governments. So as far as the timeline for India's adaptation related plans and frameworks are concerned, look at this. We started at 2008, launched the NAPAC, National Action Plan for Climate Change. We moved on to 2015 when we signed our INDC, intended nationally determined contribution at Paris as per the Paris Agreement. Then we moved on to National Disaster Management Plan. in 2019, and in 2022 we renewed or updated the INDC, the nationally determined contribution. So that actually commits, or Suomata has given a self-commitment target period of 2070 to achieve the net zero. And move on to the next part is to 2019. We have 2009 we have the State Action Plan for Climate Change. 2018 we adopted various guidelines on updating the SAPCC, that is the state level and other things, and framework for sovereign green bond was issued in 2022. And in 2023 the NAPAC mission strengthened focus on climate adaptation initiatives. Let us have a look at India's solar initiatives. We know that the total solar capacity, the solar installation power has reached 73.31 as of 2023. Out of that, Rajasthan leads with 18.7, followed by Gujarat 10.5. Because on the western India we have a good amount of barren areas and longer time period the availability as far as the solar power is concerned. And we also moving on to the rooftop solar capacity. So this also the 11.8 as of 2023. Gujarat led 2.8, followed by Maharashtra 1.7 gigawatts. The residential sector, they share only 20% of the rooftop capacity installation, solar installations, with the majority in commercial and industrial sectors. The potential rooftop solar capacity, India's 25 crore households could deploy 637 gigawatts of solar energy on rooftops. So now let us move on to the way forward. Economic growth with sustainability, clean energy expansion, and just and inclusive transition. So as far as the way forward is concerned, India should prioritize the industrial growth and job creation while ensuring low carbon development. And also it would implement the sectoral decarbonization plans in steel, cement, and other heavy industry sectors. So the points particularly encourage green urban planning for sustainable cities through smart cities mission and smart mobility solutions, develop climate resilient infrastructure that strengthen disaster preparedness, and expand appreciations for natural carbon sinks. Clean energy expansion, expand solar, wind, and green hydrogen investments, enhance battery storage and green grid infrastructure, and promote waste to energy and biofuels for a diversified clean energy mix. So coming to just and inclusive transition, which we are going to discuss in detail in the 58th lecture. So as far as the just and inclusive transition is concerned, India's policies support micro, small, and medium enterprises, so MSME, and fossil fuel workers in transitioning to green jobs. So this is one of the very important area. Fossil fuel workers, particularly from coal miners, if they need to transition to green jobs while ensuring affordable clean energy, access to rural and underprivileged communities also needs to be ensured. And now the most important and the very recent one is our third INDC, or you say the intended nationally determined contribution, which was just framed and approved by the government, by the government of India, that talks about India's updated climate action plan. So the focus of this our 2035 INDC are: first is reducing GDP emission intensity by 47% from 2005 levels. So this is again a target up in terms of the previous one. So we are saying that we must reduce the GDP emission intensity by 47% from 2005 level. Now the target is by 2035. Increasing, India also committed or a so much of pledge to has been taken to increase non-fossil fuel power capacity to 60%. So non-fossil fuel will go up to 60% by 2035. Then expanding carbon sinks by 3.5 to 4.0 billion tons with a long-term goal of net zero by 2070. So in terms of the key targets that have been set for 2035, the key targets, that is the third NDC period, National Determined Contribution period. Emission intensity, reduce emission intensity of GDP by 47% below 2005 level. Non-fossil capacity 60%. Carbon sink, create an additional carbon sink of 3 to 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide through tree and forest cover. This is important to go for 3.5 to 4 billion tons of extra CO2 equivalent through tree and forest cover. Then coming to adaptation, focus on sustainable living, that in terms of life, CRA, climate resilient in agriculture, water resources, and disaster management. So the context and highlights. As far as the third INDC is concerned, which sets India's updated climate action plan for 2035. So it has the following things, 4 important one. First is surpassing the goal. India met its 2030 target for a target of 40% non-fossil capacity 9 years ahead of schedule, with non-fossil capacity already over 52% as of early 2026. Ambitious 2035 goals. The 60% target for 2035 is an increase from the previously pledged 50% by 2030. But since there is a steady progress, by 2026 it has already become to 52%. So it is very well achievable. 60% target is very well achievable by 2035. Implementation strategy. The plan focuses on consultative whole of society approach to ensure economic growth continues alongside the green energy adoption. Now coming to the expert perspective, India could achieve these targets earlier, but as the domestic plans mention, a 70% non-fossil goal by 2035. So this is a positive things. That means we have the control with us. We have already the symbol or the signal, the indication that we are already there. So this we are putting in terms of a self-pledge. So to prepare this, we have taken help of these materials, so this literature. If you want to refer more, you are advised to visit refer to this literature. So to conclude, India is prioritizing adaptation as an immediate and locally relevant response to climate change, while continuing its long-term low-carbon transition at its own pace. Strategy focus on economic growth first, resilience building, and gradual decarbonization. It reflects global uncertainty, climate finance gaps, and need for national flexibility. Through initiatives like renewable energy expansion and National Adaptation Plan, Mission Life, and indigenous clean technology development, India seeks to balance economic growth, energy security, and environmental resilience. The path forward demands a just transition that is inclusive of all communities and sectors. And we also discussed the very recent one, that is India's third NDC, the nationally determined contribution. So this is a very, very optimistic and promising document, and we revealed as the commitment for or the suo motu pledge to achieve this by 2035.